is still struggling to unlock the secrets of the universe. But we've come a long way from the idea that we exist in a kind of giant machine, controlled by ancient laws of time and motion. Some of the world's leading physicists, biologists, and psychologists no longer scoff at the idea of ghosts. They believe that beyond the material world lies a universal consciousness in which almost anything is possible. So we ask you to keep an open mind as we investigate what may at first seem unbelievable. The idea that a mysterious energy, something beyond our understanding of life and death, can be trapped inside a building. We are on a journey into the unknown, which with its twists and turns will explore both the new frontiers of science and the hidden depths of the human mind. And every place we visit will have the reputation of being haunted. People throughout history have experienced ghosts, and every country in the world has its haunted houses. But we are going to concentrate on Australia, a vast continent of remote deserts, modern cities, and ruins with a brutal convict past. Ghosts have been seen in every state of Australia by hundreds of seemingly credible witnesses. The most frightening of all hauntings can often be where people still live, in ordinary suburban houses. You might have had the feeling yourself that there is something odd about the atmosphere of a house, an intuition that the past somehow lingers on, or the fleeting sensation that you are being watched. That's exactly how 3 young Queensland women felt when they moved into a rented house in the Brisbane suburb of Barton. The 50-year-old building had no reputation of being haunted, so there was no reason for them to feel apprehensive or afraid. But they began to have strange experiences when left alone in the house. At first, each girl thought it was her own imagination and kept it to herself, not wanting to frighten the others. Now they are convinced there is a supernatural force in the building, and they are terrified of it.
I heard footsteps one night and walked out into the kitchen to speak to whoever was there, and there was nobody there, and I mentioned it the next morning. That's when I was told that there had been things happening in the house like that.
How often do you hear footsteps?
Every day. Every night I hear them, and if I'm home during the day, I'll hear them then as well.
Are you sure that they're footsteps? They're not creaking? They're not the wind?
No, they're definite footsteps. When you are in the house, you never really do feel alone. If you are on your own, you can always feel something else there.
We've heard footsteps in the house, and as well a couple of times I've felt like I've had hands on my chest here and through my hair.
Is that why you've been in bed?
Yeah.
Were you half asleep and half awake while that was happening?
No, I was wide awake. Just as I jumped into bed, it happened. Over the last, say, 2 months, it sort of stepped up, and now I do feel it. I sort of a bit scared going to sleep in that.
So far, we've heard only furtive suggestions that the house may be haunted. A build-up of fear, which could make people imagine footsteps or something brushing against them at night. It was the third girl, Helen McLennan, who was the first to actually see a ghost.
One night I was just lying in bed and I just woke up. Like I didn't hear anything, I just woke up. And I just looked from my bed to my wardrobe and saw a shape there, like a white figure. And I sort of, shut my eyes and thought, this is really silly, and opened them again and thought, it could be a street light, wasn't, checked that out. Could be the next door neighbour's light, wasn't, checked that out. And I thought, well, there's something there.
One night I woke up for some reason. I'd been asleep for a little while, and I've got a missing louver in my room, and I was staring out of that, and there's a tree just outside my bedroom, and I saw what looked to be like a man sitting in the tree, and at first I thought I was seeing things because I'd just woken up, so I tried to blink it away, and then it wouldn't go, so I sat up in my bed and stared at it, and there was definitely something there. It appeared to be like a skeletal form, just a very skinny, naked figure, and it was, for the whole time I was watching it, it was looking up at the sky and then looking back through the window at me. Did that 5 or 6 times. Hallucinations are something that you see and they go away, but this wasn't. I made a point of looking at it, and I was staring at it for about 4 minutes. I formed the impression that it's somebody that was living here that has died, but probably isn't aware of it himself, because the noises you hear, like the front gate creaking, the footsteps in all different parts of the house, it seems to be that he's still living here with us.
Well,
There's nothing terribly remarkable or unique about the 3 girls' claims. In fact, there are thousands of similar cases all around the world. Most people dismiss such stories, especially those involving young women living alone, as imagination, triggered by branches blowing in the wind, shadows, creaking floorboards, and a fear of the unknown. Yet there are reasons to believe that Maria did actually see something crouching in the tree outside her bedroom window, saw it clearly, watched it move, and experienced real terror. She has described it in precise detail, and has nothing to gain and everything to lose by lying about it. Like all the witnesses in this program, she received no payment, yet was willing to risk being ridiculed for telling her story on television. The real question is, was the ghost crouching in the branches an hallucination which existed only in Maria's mind, or did it have a reality of its own? Even psychiatrists can't explain why some buildings seem to produce ghosts, even if they are hallucinations, and other buildings don't. The puzzling fact is that some Australian hauntings go back more than a century, and during that time, generations of people with no connection to each other have seen a ghost in the same building. In this documentary, you will meet 28 people, including scientists and policemen, who claim to have seen a ghost, and the apparitions will be recreated exactly as they describe them. You can decide for yourself whether or not the ghosts are real, but your guide will be a scientist who has devoted many years to researching such things as hauntings. He is a depth psychologist who moved to Australia 25 years ago after objecting to the system of apartheid in South Africa. He became a senior lecturer in abnormal and therapeutic psychology at the University of New England in New South Wales, and has degrees in psychology, the arts, and education. But he was also one of the first people in the world to qualify in parapsychology, the recognized scientific study of the supernatural. Dr. Maurice Marsh is no ordinary ghost hunter.
You know, there's no doubt that people do actually see ghosts. Hundreds of ordinary, everyday Australians from all walks of life have seen them. I found that about 1 in 5 of my students had had some kind of psychic experience. Of course, there are many different kinds of ghosts. Poltergeists, some appear to be the spirits of dead people, others again the telepathic projection of people's thoughts, and some appear to exist merely in a sort of time warp. Those are only some of the possibilities. But let's start with the kind of ghost that we've all heard about, and that's the apparition that traditionally haunts Old English castles. You might be surprised to hear that Australia, although a relatively young society, has what might be called historic haunts.
Some believe that ghosts are the tortured souls of people long dead, and are spirits condemned to haunt the places where they suffered or sinned in life. If that is true, then there can be no better place to look than Port Arthur convict settlement in Tasmania, a place once described as hell on earth. More than a century ago, shiploads of convicts, men, women and children, were transported here from England for crimes which could be as petty as stealing a loaf of bread. At Port Arthur, these prisoners were often subjected to the most inhuman treatment imaginable, chained for weeks at a time, forbidden to speak, whipped, or even hanged for their misdemeanors. Death was often the only escape from the tyranny of British colonial law. Port Arthur was guarded by armed sentries and savage bulldogs chained together on a narrow isthmus separating the prison from the mainland. Convicts were forced to suffer or die here, not in their hundreds, but in their thousands. And many people who now work in the gloomy ruins of Port Arthur believe that ghosts haunt the settlement. The building with the most haunted reputation is the parsonage, erected in 1842 by order of the colonial secretary. The parsonage and all other historic buildings in the old convict settlement are now being restored by the Tasmanian government as the Port Arthur Conservation Project. These building contractors used to believe that ghosts are invented by people with wild imaginations, but their attitude changed dramatically when they were given the job of renovating the old parsonage. The men lived several hours' drive away in Launceston, and so they decided to sleep overnight in the parsonage during the contract period.
It was quite often that as we were coming on down the back section there, we could hear this knocking noise, and but to me it sounded as though it was coming from the roof. And I wasn't the only one that heard it. At different stages, we all heard it.
When I first came down here, it all sort of was a bit of a joke between all the blokes, you know, and by the time we left the place, it was no longer a joke. It got pretty serious.
We'd just suddenly go cold, and you could feel the cold coming through you.
At this stage, did you believe in ghosts?
No. No, I never ever believed in ghosts at all.
What was the most dramatic thing that happened to you then?
Well, there was one night I came down from the hotel, we had tea, and we were walking, well, I was by myself, I was walking down from the hotel, and went through the kitchen and went to the room where I was sleeping, and I went to put the light on, and as I put the light on, I just got this glimpse of this image of a woman in the corner. I could see right through, I could see the wall behind it, and my bed. You know, I just said, well, you're seeing things, you know. And I tried to convince myself that it was my mind. There's a light probably as I switched the light on. But as I started to undress to go to bed, I took my overalls off. I just taken the straps off, and I was standing by the fire, and all of a sudden the curtains came flying off the wall. I never believed in ghosts, and I still sometimes think, well, perhaps I was seeing things, but I still think about the curtains. I mean, there's no way they could have come off like they did.
Mike Smith's description of a sudden drop in temperature, an unexplained chill in the atmosphere, is something noticed by many other witnesses just before a ghost appears. The next witness, Craig Goodwin, describes a peculiar experience which scientists call sleep paralysis. It's a terrifying phenomena, also known as the hag effect, which temporarily paralyzes its victims with the sensation that a ghost is sitting on their chest, trying to suffocate them. Psychologists estimate that about 1 in every 7 people have had the experience, and you'll find it repeated in other haunted houses.
On this particular night, I was in bed asleep, and I don't normally wake up during the night anyway, and when I realised that I was awake, the brain more or less told the rest of the body to sit up, sort of thing, and that was it. I couldn't move, you know. It was like as if I was just paralysed.
But he sort of looked like he was trying to get away. He sort of had his hands coming up in the front of him. As I put the light on, I could see the shadow him doing it beforehand, but when I put the light on, as soon as I put the light on, he sort of comes straight up on the bed and he was trying to strangle me.
Many people will dismiss the builder's story as nonsense and say they jumped at shadows after working themselves into a state of fear over the old building. But they're not the only ones to report ghostly happenings at the parsonage. And phantoms seem to have haunted the same site for at least 112 years. An architect, an archaeologist, and an historical botanist employed by the restoration project also claimed to have had strange experiences at Port Arthur. A ghost was first recorded here by a visitor from Hobart, George Grunsell, who stayed in the parsonage as a guest in 1874. Grunsell wrote about it in his memoirs.
The judge, Sir Valentine Fleming, was a fellow guest at the parsonage when a most intense light streamed from under the door of a room on the opposite side of the landing. Sir Valentine peeked through the keyhole and, to his astonishment, could see the interior as though brilliantly lighted up with gas, when lo and behold, all was in sudden darkness again. The next manifestation was rather startling. A servant girl entering the guest room let out a terrific shriek and fell senseless to the boards. She had distinctly seen the figure of a man in a peculiar garment looking at her through the window and grasping in his hand a knife or dagger which he held as though about to strike.
If many people experience noises, lights and apparitions in the same building, it's very difficult to say that they're all merely imagining it. In fact, there are many theories to account for haunts, and one of them is called the psychic ether hypothesis. This theory suggests that an intense emotional experience, like the suffering of the convicts at Port Arthur, can somehow alter the space in which it's released. It's almost as if the energy of those long-dead convicts had somehow embedded itself in the surroundings and under favourable circumstances could play itself over and over again like a video recording. Many people that have psychic experiences don't talk about them for fear of being thought odd or laughed at. But those who witness ghosts are often the very people in our society who are appointed to investigate facts honestly and objectively.
Sydney's Rose Bay Police Station is a strange building with an even stranger history. The station is in a converted two-storey terrace built last century to serve as the gatehouse for an old mansion called Woollahra. There's some evidence that convicts were whipped on the site in the early 1800s, and according to local legend, the old gatehouse later became a brothel where a certain Captain Piper kept ladies of ill repute. Over the years, the road has been rebuilt higher and higher, and the original front door is now underground. The bottom story has been sealed up for years like a time capsule and still has the gas fittings of a bygone era. But police don't use the lower level and certainly never go down there at night. They're too afraid. Sergeant Dennis Stevenson and his colleagues have never seen a ghost, but they're convinced they hear one. Some junior constables are so afraid they refuse to work alone in the building at night. And one of the policewomen wears a string of garlic around her neck to ward off evil spirits.
You have the presence, or you feel the presence of someone standing right next to you, ready to touch you on the shoulder. Then you sort of look around, and of course there's no one there. Then you continue on, and of course the presence there will come again. The switchboard here kept on operating. The buttons on this thing here would move to and fro, and the phones would ring. All this stuff was all moving. The panels were all moving. But I had other matters here, though I've been standing there at the typewriter over here. And of course, I'll be busy typing, doing something here. You hear the sound of footsteps walking towards you. So just a moment, please. And when you finish, you look up, and no one's there.
Heard the footsteps outside. It's like a feeling of a presence behind you when you know someone's there or you feel you're being watched. That's about it. It's a strange sort of place.
You get the funny feeling sometimes that when you're here by yourself, there is something watching you, you know. It's just unexplainable, but you can sort of feel it.
Sergeant Stevenson and his colleagues are not the only police to brush with the supernatural. The long arm of the law also reached for the unknown in August 1966, when reporters, television cameramen, and 1,000 onlookers flocked to an ordinary suburban street in the Melbourne suburb of East Oakley. For 3 days, the huge crowd trampled on the nature strips and stared expectantly at a small weatherboard house. Inside, a small party of neighbors and police were grappling with a poltergeist. Constable Lloyd Sherlock was called to the scene by police radio. He spent an entire night in the house and wrote down everything that happened. 20 years later, he's no closer to finding a logical explanation.
I was taking a name, address and all that sort of thing for the police report. Started on the wall, which seemed to be on the outside. And then from the west side wall, it went to the front door, and then it followed around the house. And after a while, it was rapping on the back door, and the back door was... And I recorded all these different positions on the only bit of paper I had, which was a previous message.
So you're sitting in this room 20 years ago, and you hear knocking coming from all over the house,
yes,
different directions,
yes,
within seconds of each other.
Split seconds. One second would be on one corner of a house, and then the next, as fast as light perhaps could travel, on the other side of the house.
So in investigating that, did you come up with any logical explanation?
Nothing. Even after 20-odd years, it still amazes me.
What was the closest you ever got to the sound?
The closest was on the back door. It was a flush panel door, and I had my hand on the doorknob, and I could sense and hear this knocking on the outside. Open the door, nothing there.
Did the sound stop?
Yeah, it stopped, as though it was beating me. To me, it seemed as though he, or who, or she, or what it was, knew I was going to open that door.
So this entity, or whatever it was that was knocking on the house, seemed to have some intelligence attached to it.
I reckon it did. I reckon it did. Well, the only thing I can put it down is something supernatural, something unexplained.
While we were filming at the site, a next-door neighbor told us that he had been inside the house when the poltergeist activity first erupted, before the crowds and police first arrived. He agreed to tell us his story on condition that we conceal his identity.
Well, I have seen 2 or 3 lights, only about 8 inches long, similar to a small fluorescent lighting. And I've seen that on about 3 occasions, and on different nights.
Were these lights moving?
Absolutely.
Inside the house?
Inside the house. The taps were always going on and off, mainly staying on all the time. At one stage there, I did get a spanner and tighten them up, and I defied anybody to have turned them on. without using a spanner, but they still went on. Something or someone turned them on. I've seen the bed being more or less rocked like a rocker, and then at times the kids getting jumped up and down, thumped up and down as if you were pushing the bed up and down all the time.
Is there any way the children could have been doing that themselves?
No, no way in the world, no way in the world.
So did it appear as if some other force was doing it?
Absolutely.
What was the state of the children when this was happening?
Oh, they were in a bad way, a real bad way.
Poltergeists are rarer than conventional hauntings, and they seem to have a much more devastating effect on those who suffer them at close quarters. It took the woman and her two daughters several years to fully recover from the experience. But when they moved out of the house, the activity suddenly stopped.
Poltergeist cases, like the one we've just seen, have got nothing to do with ghosts whatsoever. They centre around a particular person rather than a particular place, like this 13-year-old girl that I've got on the screen. In her presence, things appeared and disappeared mysteriously, and objects were thrown around the room. She believed that it was a devil, Dracu, who was doing it, and occasionally when he got annoyed with her, he would bite her and scratch her, like these marks that you see on the cheek at the moment. I've investigated 12 poltergeist cases, 6 of which turned out to be genuine. What interests me very much is how that poltergeist subject differs from an ordinary person. And the answer seems to be that they're bottling up an intense emotion like anger, and nothing of it is getting out. When I succeed in getting them to release that anger, the disturbances stop. Some investigators have been more interested in the energy dynamics. What they do is to plot the movements in relation to the poltergeist subject. When you do that, this kind of diagram of the movements results. From the information, the type of energy field that could be producing the movements can be worked out. The energy appears to be swirling around the person, building up and collapsing as it does so, something like an electric fan rotating and blowing pieces of paper about. Poltergeist energy is being explored for its military applications. The Russians, for example, have someone who can stop a frog's heart beating using such energy. It seems that in poltergeist cases at least, it's the special power of a living person which produces the disturbance. But that's not the traditional explanation for a ghost. Some people with religious views believe that evil spirits or demons can haunt a house and are hostile and destructive towards living people in it. To investigate this possibility, we must go to a former hospital 97 kilometres east of Perth.
The old township of York stands like a time capsule in the Avon Valley, a fertile district on the edge of the West Australian desert. The town flourished in the 1880s as a staging post between Perth and the gold diggings. But in 1894, a railway to the goldfields bypassed York, and the town was neglected for more than half a century. The old York Hospital was built in 1896 to serve the farming district, and is on the site of a convict depot opposite the town cemetery. The hospital was used mainly by poorer residents. Wealthier people were nursed in their own home, where surgery was carried out on the kitchen table or in the patient's room. The building is now owned by the National Trust, which leases it to the state government as a youth hostel. In January 1980, a group of 5 adults and 28 children from a little athletics club 144 kilometres away travelled to York Hospital for a camping holiday. But their holiday was to become a nightmare.
We were told not to go upstairs at all.
Did you go upstairs at any stage?
Yes, we went up the first night. The reason we went up the first night, because it was such a very, very hot time, and the children were very hot. And I suggested, if we had a look upstairs, being up high, there may be more breeze coming through for the children to sleep up there. And, of course, Paul and Mrs. Kramer went upstairs, But when they came downstairs, they were very pale, and they said there's something wrong with the place up there.
We ventured up there with torches, and we got midway along the dormitory, and our torches went out. We had this howling wind coming down from the chimney, and with 47 degrees outside, there was no way that there could have been any wind.
We walked past the fireplace in the middle of the room, and both our torches went out. Now, at first I thought it was just my torch blowing, so we walked back 3 or 4 times, and again they went on and off, you know, corresponding as to when we're in front of the fireplace, and there again when we sort of came past the fireplace. But again, every time we walked in front of the fireplace, about 2 or 3 metres, they actually went off and came back on again.
It's very hard to explain. These things happen, you know your torch has gone out, and you know the other person's torch has gone out. We sort of looked at the torches to see if there's anything wrong with them. As I say, they came back on their own accord.
There was a foul smell which came from the small attic which was up the top. To me, it smelled as something dead, sort of like a dead animal or something. A very, very foul stench.
They said, well, you couldn't put the children up there because there's something strange up there. And then we're sitting there for a while, and this terrible moaning noise started. Well, at first you'd say it was the wind, but then when you look and you say, well, there wasn't any wind. It was so hot and still at York. So it wasn't wind, but then it got louder, and it was a definite sound of a woman crying, in pain, moaning.
It was a definite noise, which wasn't the rustle of the trees, it wasn't any wind, and the only way you could explain it was as a moaning.
It was frightening. It was very frightening because you'd swear there was someone up there in terrible pain. But I mean, because there wasn't anyone there.
Why did you not leave then?
Well, we're in a position, to be honest with you. As I said, we hired a bus, and Maureen's husband was kind enough to take the day off and drive us there, and he was to pick us up in a week's time, and that's all we could do. We had no transport there. We didn't have a car. Little did we know these kind of things would happen. I mean, you wouldn't have gone in the first place, would you?
But at this early stage, did you think the building was haunted, or did you think something else?
Mrs. Kramer had thought the place was haunted. And of course, I said, don't be stupid. You're imagining. The imagination's running a little bit wild here. And of course, Paul said to me, you know, Mum, there's something definitely wrong here. Well, the first thing that happened that morning, Maureen and I got up to get the children's breakfast. We went into the kitchen. We got the milk. And I had this crockery jug, which I put on the bench. And I walked across to Maureen. And the next thing, out of the corner of my eye, I could see this jug lift and come across, just float straight across the room at it.
I just stood there watching it. I couldn't believe my eyes. It moved, and it came to the end, and instead of toppling off like things normally do, it just floated.
It was very hard to believe. And of course, I thought then, well, it didn't just fall on the floor, it definitely floated. And because Maureen and I stood there shocked. We were shocked. Then the next thing, the stove would turn on and off. While you were using it, it had just turned itself on and off. It was a very queer thing that kept happening in those kitchens.
Did anything else around the place move?
Yeah, and the doorknobs. You'd be standing outside and they'd be spinning. Just absolutely spinning. And there was nobody else on the other side or anything because we checked all that. But they were just spinning, the doorknob spin.
For some reason, I was just walking past the main staircase which went upstairs and came to my notice, and getting one of the ladies, there seemed to be blood coming from within the staircase, sort of running out on the outside of the staircase. The actual lady tasted it to check that it really was blood, and she said it was, and it definitely looked like, I didn't personally taste it, but she did, and she said it definitely tasted like blood, and it certainly looked like blood. It was trickling out at probably a constant rate. It sort of, if I was sort of trying to give you a quantity, it probably would have been, if I mopped it up, I might have probably filled a full face cloth type thing if I mopped it up.
Well, the worst thing that happened there, we had a little girl there, and she was running along the hallway. And the next thing she screamed, and because when she came down to us, her wrist was cut right open. Terrible gash she had.
The girl was actually somehow thrown through the window, arm first. She, I think, from memory serves, she had 12 or 15 stitches inserted in her arm.
Now, this little girl, she's only a little tot, that's all. It would be impossible for her to fall and her arm to go through that glass. It was too high for the child.
How high was the glass from the floor?
Probably at 3.5 to 4 foot.
How tall was the girl?
Well, she was only about 8 years old, probably 4 foot herself.
They had to get a plank of wood and smash the glass out. It's the only way you could get it out. So we couldn't work it out.
Did you only hear the moaning the once?
No, the moaning was every night. And it even got to the stage where a couple of afternoons, where I was left with the children by myself, a couple of children, it continued then. But it was every night.
You know that there are people watching saying, what a pack of nonsense.
Oh, yeah. We've sort of been through this before. It just, things happen, you sort of tell them as you see them.
But this really did happen?
Oh, yeah.
The 3 witnesses say the frightening phenomena continued at York Hostel for 4 days without anyone seeing a ghost. But they suspected the disturbances were coming from the locked room upstairs, where Paul Harrison and Maureen Kramer first experienced a foul smell and cold wind. Legend has it that in the old days, patients who had died and those who were about to die were kept together in that section of the hospital. Locals call it the morgue or dying room. And it's said that on certain nights, the ghost of a former matron who died violently at the old hospital can be heard moaning as it wanders along the upstairs wards. On the final night of their stay, something happened which forced the 3 adults to gather their courage and pay a last visit to the dying room on the top floor.
I saw what I can only describe as an apparition on the stairs. It's just like a fleeting object. I can't really describe what it was. All I know is it absolutely petrified me.
She said to me, there's something floating up the staircase. Because as we turned around and looked at her, her face had changed completely. You'd never recognise the woman. At first I got frightened. I would have said the woman had had a stroke because her face was so twisted you wouldn't have recognised her.
Apparently, from what I can gather, I knew nothing else for a few minutes, and then we heard this almighty bang.
An extremely loud explosion seemed to come from, well, very close. Originally we thought it was a gas heater or a water heater or something blowing up.
I had to investigate. I couldn't work it out. But I only got to the second landing, and a terrible feeling came over me, like pins and needles, and I couldn't move. And you felt very, very old, like you'd aged. I felt like I'd aged. But then the pins and needles left me, but I didn't continue. I came back down. Paul and Mrs. Kramer continued up and looked in this small room.
It was open. It actually blown open and it was fixed right the way back. The bolt was back and the lock was off.
Did you get any sensation while you were there from that particular room?
Yes, I couldn't put my foot over the threshold. I felt nauseated every time I went near the place. It was uncanny.
It was only a very, very small room and it didn't appear to be anything in there, but the smell was still in there.
I was going to go and ask for help to take these children out that night because I said I can't stay here another night, but we had to. There was nothing more we could do.
What did you in fact do then?
Well, we all went into the one room. I know it's going to sound silly, but we had, one of them had a baseball bat, cricket stumps, and even one of the ladies had a can of pressure-packed fly spray. I know it sounds so stupid. What we're going to do with it, I don't really know, but then we had, well, everything was quiet for a while, and then this friend was with us. She was laying on the bed, and she started screaming out, "They've got me by the throat." And of course we said to her, "Wake up, you're having a sleep," but she wasn't asleep. And of course when we turned the light on, I said, "You've only had a sleep." I said, "It's been too much for you." But when we looked, there's definite marks on her throat. And of course I think that was the last straw. I mean, that definitely, she said she had me by the throat, and there was definite marks on that woman's throat. She said to me, "Don't go on your bed, there's something at your window, Joan." And I said to her, "No," I said, "there's nothing at the window." But I did, I pulled the curtain back and there was the figure at the window.
Can you describe it?
It was a very big woman, very, very big woman, like matronly sort of a woman. And all you can see, it was the body, the head, but her arms were folded like that. Yet I lifted the curtain, and it shows you what shock does to people, because I must have been in shock. I just kept staring at it. Then I put the curtain back, and I said to him, "There's nothing." No, I thought, "No, I'm not seeing it." So I laid on the bed, and I thought, "No, I've got to look again." And I did look again, and it was still there. The next morning, we were up, out, and waiting for that bus.
I really can't give an explanation. A lot of things just happened. I've got no explanation whatsoever. I'm absolutely stumped.
York Hostel seemed to come straight out of a horror movie. It also snowballed from day to day, so that by the final night, things were becoming very hectic indeed. I think those people were lucky that they could leave the following day, otherwise the disturbances would have got even worse. When children are involved in a group like that, it's best to get them out as quickly as possible and back to their own homes. But, you know, in a way, the adults brought all that on themselves, because what they were doing was reliving an ancient fairy story, exploring the forbidden room. They were told that a part of the building was off limits, and they went back to it again and again and again. And every time they did that, the disturbances got worse. But let's leave the possibility of evil forces for the time being, and instead turn to some ghosts that are much less threatening. There's some ghosts that inspire a great deal of affection in living people.
The Rocks, a small area nestling in the shadows of Sydney Harbour Bridge, probably has more ghosts per square kilometre than any other spot in the country. The British settlement of Australia began here on January the 26th, 1788, when Captain Arthur Phillip sailed the first fleet into Sydney Harbour. From that time onwards, it has been an ideal breeding ground for ghosts, built by convict chain gangs which suffered the continent's first whippings and hangings. Despite high hopes for the colony, the Rocks became a haven for thugs, drunks and prostitutes, and the site of Australia's first prison. Later, it became a slum area, and in 1900, there was an outbreak of bubonic plague. Poorer residents were forced out so the infected buildings could be fumigated or demolished. The surviving buildings are now being restored by the Sydney Cove Redevelopment Authority. the sort of conservative, semi-government body which would normally never believe in ghosts. The trouble is that its own information centre, in a former coroner's court and mortuary, is haunted by a mischievous ghost which the staff have nicknamed Fred. It first appeared to an office manager who saw the apparition of a young man which called out, "I am innocent." The current information officer, Josephine Christensen, has no fear of Fred. In fact, she seems rather fond of him.
Do you know anything of the history of Fred or why he may be haunting this place?
No, I wish Fred would tell us. I'm sure we'd all be very pleased, because if he's upset, we'd like to help him. He doesn't seem to do anything very bad to us. I mean, we coexist with Fred. We say good morning to him when we arrive in the visitor centre, hoping that we'll put Fred in a good mood for the rest of the day.
Quite often people sense a presence in the building, even though they don't see anything or hear anything. Do you sense a presence here at all?
Well, I think this is simply because of the stories we've had. We do. We sense Fred. We'll come in the mornings and a lot of our display material will be on the ground. And we can see no apparent reason for this except that Fred doesn't like it there. And we put it back. And sometimes we put it back so often and it falls down that we just don't put it back anymore. And Fred wins in our eyes.
There's another Fred, about 100 kilometres away from Sydney, at Campbelltown. Every November, the city holds one of the world's most extraordinary festivals to celebrate the ghost of an ex-convict murdered in the town 160 years ago. For 6 days, the town develops ghost fever, and thousands of people line the streets for a parade of decorated floats, pipers, brass bands, and ghosts in costume. It's all in honour of Australia's most famous and cherished phantom, the spirit of a ticket-of-leave convict called Fred Fisher, who once operated a small farm on the edge of town. The legend of Fisher's ghost is part of Australia's folklore, but the story is founded on historical fact. Fred Fisher was an industrious man determined to rise above his convict past. He worked hard on his small property and enjoyed the friendship and respect of the townspeople. He was last seen alive one afternoon in 1826, mending fences in paddocks near a small creek. Court records show that while he was working, Fred was visited by a more prosperous farmer called George Worrell, who argued with him over the location of the boundary between their two properties. But the terrible fate of Fred Fisher wasn't discovered until months later. It's not the brutal murder of Fred Fisher that the people of Campbelltown celebrate every year. It's his ghost. The story has come to symbolise the triumph of good over evil and the victory of a little Aussie battler over the bigger bloke. As far as the townspeople knew, Fred Fisher had simply vanished. And in the weeks that followed, George Worrell fabricated the story that Fisher had sold him his farm before fleeing to England to escape a forgery charge. Worrell began selling up Fisher's goods, and although the townsfolk were suspicious, nothing could be proved. He had disposed of Fisher's body by dragging it to a small creek and burying it in a shallow grave. About 3 months after Fisher's disappearance, a local resident, John Farley, came rushing white-faced into the local pub, claiming he had seen Fisher's ghost sitting on the handrail of a fence. He said the apparition had slowly turned and pointed towards the creek. And a short time later, Aboriginal trackers guided police to the body at the exact spot indicated by the ghost. Worrell was arrested, convicted, and hanged for the crime. The story became legend, and for the past century and a half, locals have claimed that Fisher's ghost can sometimes still be seen sitting on the fence, pointing accusingly to where he was dragged by his murderer. The historic Princess Theatre in Melbourne is the home of a third well-loved ghost called Fred. It's the apparition of a noted opera singer, Frederick Baker, who died in the theatre under the most bizarre circumstances imaginable. On March the 3rd, 1888, Frederick was playing the demonic role of Mephistopheles in a production of Faust. In the final scene of the opera, Mephistopheles returns to Hades with Faust, and Fred, in crimson costume, descended to hell amid theatrical smoke and flames through the stage trapdoor. A platform operated by ropes and pulleys carried Fred below, but he suffered a heart attack on the way down and died without speaking another word. It seems Fred couldn't accept missing out on the final bow, because from the moment he died, strange events were recorded at the Princess Theatre. His ghost has become a theatrical legend. The phantom is known to generations of theatre folk as Federici, a glowing human shape whose appearance spells good luck for any forthcoming production. And Federici has appeared to scores of people over the past century.
As a matter of fact, it was right here. I was sitting where I am standing now, and my back was towards the house, and Malcolm Phillips, who was directing the play, unfortunately Malcolm's now dead, but he was looking out into the theatre and he said, "There he is, the poor old bastard." And I said, "Who?" And he said, Fred, he's out there in the circle. So I really had to build myself up to it. It wasn't not my favourite moment at that moment of time. And I turned around and there he was up there in the circle. And the theatre had gone cold. And I became conscious of the smell like old lavender. You know that type of smell if you go into an elderly lady's home and you get open linen drawers and you get that strange lavender type smell. But what we saw was a shape of white light like that, with a diffused grey light around it. All I can say is that's what happened to me right here on this stage, and whatever it was up there.
We've just seen two non-threatening but very different ghosts. Federici at the Princess Theatre seems to linger on for no apparent purpose. Fisher's ghost suggests two possibilities. The first is that his spirit survived death and came back to give information about the murder. The second possibility is that his observer gained telepathic information from the murderer's mind and dramatized this up into a projected apparition. But our next ghost is quite different. In fact, it may not be a ghost at all. It's a kind of force which brings out the violence in people, and it exists in Clarkfield Hotel, which has the reputation of being the most haunted building in Australia.
The historic Bluestone pub at Clarkfield, 40 kilometres north of Melbourne, has been haunted for as long as locals can remember. The hotel was built in 1856, and the famous Cobb & Co. coach company used it as a staging post to the goldfields. There's a legend that a young girl was murdered in the building and thrown down a well near the stables. And apart from seeing ghosts, those who live at the hotel seem to suffer from unexplained fits of violence. The upper story walls are peppered with shotgun pellets, and fists have been smashed through doors by owners and staff who were later driven out in fear. The past 3 generations of hotel owners all insist that Clarkfield Hotel is inhabited by some unexplained force. One example is former licensee Frank Nelson, who scoffed at the idea of ghosts when he took over the hotel in March 1984.
So how long were you in the hotel before anything happened?
3 days. 3 days we were there. And,
what happened?
Well, we'd been working, you know, trying to meet a few customers, only the wife and I there, you know, no staff on, and we'd worked, you know, 3 till 1 o'clock in the morning, and went upstairs and hopped into bed. And I suppose it was about 2 o'clock. I heard the, you know, bottles rattling and glasses being moved, and I thought, oh, well, some of the locals, you know, you've just taken the hotel over, and a lot of country pubs, the locals walk in and out when they feel like it. And so I went to go down to investigate, and got about halfway down the stairs and heard a bit more noise, and I thought, sounds like more than one. I think I better grab something. I felt a real cold draft of wind, like you know, walking into an air conditioner. It just sort of blew me back a bit. It was something like someone picked me up and tried to throw me over the banister. I had both hands on the banister and it just seemed to disappear. Didn't feel any pain, but when I went to get up, my foot was sort of twisted back around. When I went to the hospital, they said it was impossible for me just to fall downstairs, that I would have had to fall from a height because it was shattered in 3 places and I had to have 3 steel pins inserted.
How long were you in crutches?
Some crutches for 7 months.
Are you absolutely convinced that some supernatural force was the cause for that?
Well, to start off with, I didn't think it was. And, you know, I didn't want to go to the hospital and say the ghost or something was throwing me down the stairs. It was the things that happened to me later on that convinced me that there was something there. The thing that frightened me the most, I used to have my name called out at night, and this had happened 2 or 3 times a week. And I'd get out of bed and think, you know, someone wants to buy some beer after hours or something like that, you know. There'd just be no one there. And then one particular night, I was in bed in the room on my own, and the door opened, and the presence of something was there, and the next thing, I had my leg in plaster, and a hand came on my leg and started twisting it, and I grabbed hold of the crutches that were beside the bed, and I was, you know, get away, and...
Was the room in darkness?
It was in darkness. Anyway, I got up and I put the light on, and the door had shut again, so I put the deadlock on it, hopped back into bed, and the door opened, and that was it. I just lay there going hot and cold.
The current cook is Graham Fairley. 3 of his predecessors were affected by ghosts. 2 became violent and had to be taken away by police. The other eventually fled the building in terror. Graham doesn't think he'll last much longer either.
I tell you, if you look out here now, you'll see it's a nice country, it's country style living, country scene. It looks really nice at this stage, at this time of the day. But at night time, if you come up here, you just happen to be looking out here, I don't know what it is. It's maybe that well, there's a well down there, there's that tree there, but you get a very cold feeling, just comes really chilling, blood chilling, and it comes all over your body, and you just can't stand it any longer. You just say, I can't explain why it is.
Do you look through that window anymore?
Not after the first 3 times, no. No, no more.
Have you ever seen anything as you look out there?
Yes. Actually, one night, the second night I was here, I was looking out and I was looking at that tree, and it's quite a nice tree, but all of a sudden, it was this face of a man, a person, was like peering at me out of the tree, and I looked, and I thought, oh, it must be the light or some, I don't know what, I can't explain it. So I looked again and had a close look, and no matter which way the tree was blowing, that face stood still. All the branches were blowing, and but that face stood stock still, staring at me.
What effect did that have on you?
Well, that's it. I just closed it. That's why I'm leaving, to be honest, you know. I mean, that's just incredible. I have experienced a mist early in the morning in the kitchen. You walk down, there's no mist anywhere. You go into the kitchen, it's just full of mist, like a fog. Since I've been here 3 times, I've seen all the animals just go berserk at night. The whole lot of them, from the rabbits to the dogs, the donkeys, the goats, the ducks, they'll just all go berserk, crazy. We run around in the paddock out there, just unbelievable. And one night I got the manager, I said, Steve, we better go down and check this out, thinking it might have been a fox or something like that. We went down there was nothing there, and they were still going all berserk, just all running around in circles. Incredible.
There is some force there. Whatever it is, I couldn't explain it, you know. It's it's something that, you know, really gets to you after a while. You're starting to look over your shoulder when you walk upstairs at night.
I hope you're in good spirits after your visit to Clarkfield Hotel. Unfortunately, that was another case in which people got hurt. In haunts like that, two factors seem to be involved. The first is in the building, and in only 13% of cases does exorcism clear that. In another 13%, it makes things worse. The second factor is the personality of the observers, and personality is very difficult to change. So perhaps the most practical thing that you can do is to move out of the haunted building. But our next ghost is much more attractive. In fact, she's my favourite in this series, and I'm sure you'll like her too. She's a sexy young lady in a red bikini who haunts a modern house in Adelaide. As the story develops, ask yourself what meaning she could have for the man who is the one person at a crowded party who could see her. She's a ghost whose symbolic qualities exceed even her considerable ghostly attractions.
Mrs. Di Close says she had just moved into her brick veneer home in Elizabeth Downs in Adelaide when one of the most amazing ghosts on record manifested itself in the hallway, then disappeared, leaving a pool of yellowish liquid behind.
She was small, about 5'2", very attractive, shoulder-length brown hair, always wore a bikini.
How did she behave?
Aggressively to begin with, very much so. I woke up one night and I felt that I was being strangled. I could feel this pressure around my throat. Things would get broken in the house. The whole house just seemed one of aggression, depression. It was just an awful feeling.
Di's friends thought she'd gone mad at first. But then one by one, visitors to the house also began to see the ghost, and it made almost daily appearances. It was an experience which gave vehicle welder Brian Hall the shock of his life.
Oh, there was a party going on, and my parents were invited, and I was on my own single, so they said, why not come along?
Did you know Di Close very well?
No, I didn't. My parents did, but I didn't.
Did you know about the story of the ghost in the red bikini?
No, I'd heard stories of things happening in the house, but not actually a ghost. No.
What happened when you went there?
Well, I was sitting with my parents and their friends having a drink, and there was a young lady sitting across from me, but on an angle round in the other part of the room, and she was sort of looking at me, giving me the, you know, the nod, you're on your own, I'm on my own.
I mean, I feel I know that there's another girl in there, but I could pass from the... So was she right looking across? You know,
A couple of minutes later, I saw her come walking through from a different angle in a bikini and go out the back door to the swimming pool. And I thought, that's strange, you know, nobody else in the pool, it's not midsummer. So I got up and walked across to the window, and there she was in the pool. So I went out. I didn't actually speak to her. She was just sort of floating around in the pool. And I went back inside to get a drink. And when I looked, the woman was still sitting in the same seat. And I thought, that's strange. So I asked the people that was with me, has she got a sister, or is there somebody here that looks like her? And they said, no, what's the problem? I said, well, I've just seen her in the swimming pool out the back. And they said, oh, rubbish. There she is, still sitting there. So with that, I went back and looked out the window, and there she was still in the pool. So I went out. And as I went out the door, she came to the side of the pool and put her arm out to me as if to say, you know, take my hand sort of thing. And I did. As I put my hand into her hand, that was it. She just vanished and left me standing there freezing sort of cold, and she was gone.
Did you feel anything as you put your hand
Nothing.
through?
Nothing.
Did you tell people about it afterwards?
Well, there was another friend came out and he was standing behind me, and when I turned round, he just looked at me and said, you've seen something, and I was standing sort of like this, and he grabbed hold of my hand. I said, it's frozen. You've seen something, come inside, I'll get you another drink. And that's what we did do, and then the story came out that supposedly there was a ghost of some young girl in that house.
What effect did this have on you in the weeks that followed?
Very much like I am now, I suppose. I get very nervous talking about it, and it gives me an horrible itch, you know, a real uncomfortable feeling.
Scientists talk about the possibility of collective hallucinations, of telepathic projections. And of course, a lot of people talk about ghosts. Are you convinced that this actually was a ghost?
Yes, because I know what they say about this collective hallucinations. It couldn't possibly have been, because there were so many different days, different times, different people. You didn't have to have a crowd. There could be just one or two people there. And it'd be all odd times, so it was just too obvious to try and explain it away. There was a ghost there.
Adelaide's bikini ghost is just one example of the ancient belief that spirits can inhabit water. To find another, we must travel more than 2,000 kilometers to where the hulk of a 7,300-ton freighter, the Alkimos, sits abandoned off the Western Australian coast. The old steamer is trapped on rocks and sand just offshore, with the wind singing eerily in her rigging and waves lapping at gaping rents in her side. When the tide is high, she shifts restlessly, as if yearning to head out to sea, and local cray fishermen always give her a wide berth. With the superstition common to all seagoing folk, they believe the Alkimos is cursed. Many of them testify to having seen a dark figure in oilskins, a ghost they call Henry, stalking the deck at night. No one goes on the wreck now, and even an hour aboard alone is the stuff nightmares are made of. The Alkimos seems to scream as its rusted metal structure is slowly torn apart by the sea. Many people believe the Alkimos was a cursed ship even before the ghost appeared. The old wreck has an almost incredible history of ill fortune. She was launched in America in 1943, but no company kept her long before selling her off, and her name was changed several times, which is an old seafaring recipe for bad. Repairs after constant collisions, breakdowns, and groundings had given her an extra 153 millimeters in length by the time she reached Australia, and the Alkimos still seemed bent on her own destruction. She ran aground 250 kilometers north of Perth and later caught fire in the dock. She was ordered to Hong Kong for repairs, but the tow rope snapped and she was driven onto a reef. A second tug which tried to tow her off also caught fire. Then the Alkimos snapped her anchor chain and was permanently grounded. Since then, she has caught fire 6 times, and every attempt to salvage her has met with accident, injury, or death. She has been abandoned for the past decade, and those who do venture aboard never forget the experience. One such witness is Ray Krakauer, an Anzac veteran who's now a local justice of the peace.
I was asked to do a bit of looking after it and do a bit of salvage. I spent weeks on it, days on it. I heard talking many times, many times. You hear this guttural talking. Now, the wireless cabin was sealed up with a lock on the door I heard the Morse key sending out a message. You're saying things go on, and here's a locked room with no one in the room, and the Morse key, a hand Morse key, working itself with no power. While working in the number 3 hatch, removing some degaussing apparatus, out of the darkness, an apparition appeared, almost like a fluorescent light. It was the shape of a person. So I picked up a piece of 3x2 and I was going for it. And then the junk that was lying around was in my way, and I thought, well, there's going to be an accident one way or other. So I just turned and went up the ladder. If I say a thing happened, it happened. I'm not going to tell a man who saw somebody walking with their head under their arm in the Tower of London, say he didn't see it. He said he saw it. Okay, he saw it. Now, I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. If I say it, that happened. That's what happened.
One of Western Australia's top skin divers and salvage operators, Jack Sue, has written a book about the shipwreck and firmly believes he too has been touched by the alchemist curse. Jack swears that while on board, he heard moaning coming from an empty bunk, and his wife was tragically killed in a car accident during the same period.
And after my own personal experience, the loss of my former wife, nobody would ever convince me otherwise than that there is something wrong with that ship.
Do you blame the ship for the death of your wife in any way at all?
Yes, I do. Almost everybody that's been on that ship for any length of time spent or been involved with the ship in business matters, nearly all have had some ill fortune, illness, or tragedy.
People who board the Alchemist seem to step back into the past. In some curious way, she seems to be busy with unfinished business. There are cooking smells coming from her galley, Morse from her radio room, men walking about on her deck, and there's Henry in his yellow oilskins, riding out some invisible storm. What a pity that there was nobody there who could understand Morse. Now we'll never know what the content of that message was or the date of the transmission. Alchemist poses us with a problem of deciding when ordinary bad luck turns into something more sinister. To the people trying to dismantle her, Alchemist seems to be fighting back stubbornly, injuring and harming those people that are trying to destroy her. But perhaps we better leave her to become a legend similar to the Flying Dutchman, and instead move from shipwrecks to ship relics housed in a building with a very interesting history.
It's hard to imagine a building with a more brutal and tragic past than Fremantle Museum. It was built in the 1860s to house convict men and women who had gone insane after suffering the cruelties of the British penal system. It was called Fremantle Lunatic Asylum, and before the installation of padded cells, prisoners were chained and doused with cold water if they became uncontrollable. The building has had a haunted reputation for as long as people can remember, and according to staff in the old limestone museum, no less than 4 ghosts now roam its rambling corridors. Visitors to the museum have also had strange experiences. One witness is producer and director Jerry Atkinson, who wrote a play about a ghost and staged it in the museum quadrangle at night. The leading lady, a girl called Judy, was in period costume, and at intermission, he followed her into the building to discuss the next scene.
And I noticed her going up the steps to the dressing room, because the dressing room was upstairs. And I followed her, calling out, "Judy, I'd like to talk to you about a change in one of the moves." But I didn't get an answer. I noticed her just walking up the steps. There she was in this old gown. And I kept on calling, and she didn't answer. And then she went into the dressing room. I saw her go into the dressing room. The door closed. Well, first of all, that was against the rules, because I had a rule in that particular production. That door was not to be shut because we had children in the cast. And then I thought perhaps she was a little bit upset, as happens in plays. So I knocked on the door and found it was locked and called out. No answer. I was getting a bit annoyed about this, really. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice. I turned, and there was the real Judy behind me, coming up the stairs after I'd been up to knock on the door. Well, we opened the door, and when we went in, there wasn't a soul there. And
was there any other way out?
No, there were only windows, and there's a sheer drop. It's the first story.
Did you check the room to see if anyone was hiding there?
Yes, we did. We looked right round. We couldn't find a soul.
Over the years, several staff members have testified to seeing the ghost of a woman which carries a lamp and moans softly as it wanders the museum galleries at night. The ghost seems to be endlessly searching for something, and they believe the apparition is that of a convict woman who went mad with grief after her young daughter was abducted more than a century ago. Records show the woman eventually committed suicide by jumping from the first-floor window of what is now the Investigator Gallery. The ghost seems to react most strongly when young schoolgirls visit the old asylum. Mrs. Emily Johansson, a former museum attendant, witnessed one such incident.
At a building with that type of cruelty and sadness, there must be some waves left behind, and that's what I always did feel. When anything had happened, it was always either this agitation or aggression. 3 young teenagers came down from John Curtin High School. All of a sudden, 2 locked this other one in the cell.
Stop it! It's not a game anymore. Let me out!
She just shrugged me off and shot off like a scared rabbit. But it was the feeling at that time of, I'd say agitation is the term that comes to mind.
Is it possible that it was simply the wind?
No, oh no, Recherche Gallery, well, you know, it's quite sheltered really. There's no way, not even a gale would come in there.
Did you notice that Fremantle Museum had the apparition of a living person, the leading lady at the play? We now know that such apparitions occur when people have out-of-the-body experiences, so that if we could somehow find a way of inducing those out-of-the-body experiences, we could perhaps produce apparitions to order. One way is to put the person in a sensory isolation tank. They are floated in warm water in complete silence and darkness. In a little while, some people feel that they are left their bodies and they can be asked to try and visit a particular place and bring back a report of what they see. This type of research has obvious military applications for spying and is being explored by both the Russians and Americans. But when an apparition confronts a scientist unexpectedly, it's much more difficult to study. Take the case of the CSIRO researcher who saw the grey ghost of a girl who died the previous century.
The 152-year-old mansion, Stowell House, is Tasmania's headquarters for Australia's scientific research organisation, the CSIRO. Stowell sits on Battery Point, the most historic section of the state capital, Hobart, and there's a century-old legend that an upper story of the old building is haunted by the grey ghost of a beautiful girl called Amy. Of course, scientists scoffed at the story when they first took over the mansion in 1949. They included the head of research development, Dr. Don Martin.
In those days, to work back a lot because I was trying to do scientific work as well as administrative. And
I noticed that the footsteps down below, which I would go down to investigate to find no one there, and I thought, oh, well, wind and movement in an old building. I used to have an office upstairs, and seated at the desk looking straight at the doorway, I was conscious of this figure of a young woman, I would think, of 18 or so, dressed in what appeared, it wasn't in Technicolor, it appeared to be as if it was a grey dress, full skirt, probably a hoop at the bottom. So I'm not sure, I think my impression was half sleeves. But it was, as you got towards the neck and above, it was transparent. I looked up and saw it standing there, then it moved down the corridor to the right.
Did it scare you out of your wits?
No, I didn't. I was surprised to see it more. I was sort of surprised. My reaction time's fairly slow, I think.
Did you think of investigating it or experimenting with it?
Oh, no, I didn't. I sort of felt that this was out of my field altogether, being a botanist by training, which is fairly prosaic.
Did you believe in ghosts before you saw the apparition?
Not consciously, no. No, I'm not a very religious person, but I always felt that anyone who believed in any sort of life after death would have to really consider the possibility that there would be ghosts.
You must have thought about it a lot as well. Did you consider the possibility as to whether or not it may be an hallucination of some form?
Well, it might be in my mind, but I can't connect it to any past experience which would lead me to think it was just something projected from past experience.
You know, I can sympathise with Dr. Martin. In cases like that, where a ghost appears only very infrequently, it's very difficult to set up instruments so that you can investigate it scientifically. Instruments like cameras, tape recorders, recording thermometers, and even infrared detectors have been used to monitor haunted houses. But in our next case, the investigators, most imaginatively, have used a new type of detector which they designed and built themselves.
Stephen Franklin is a 16-year-old Melbourne student whose interest in ghosts began with the film Ghostbusters. He decided that what the filmmakers created as a fantasy, he would try in real life. Stephen is not really your average teenager. At 16 years old, he's been selected as an exchange student to America and is taking part in NASA's summer space program. His two friends, John Wilson and Damien Gould, also 16, are fellow science students.
I got my basic inspiration from the movie Ghostbusters, and I approached John after that and asked him whether he could build me equipment that was, they had on the movie.
First of all, I thought he was nuts, but then I became interested after he told me what he wanted to do, so I had a go of it, and we kind of had several attempts and built our way up. This here's the transmitter, and it's just like your ordinary FM radio and transmitter, except it works on a much more obscure frequency. And this is our receiver. Now, that receives the transmissions from here. Now, what happens is any electrical fields or disturbances between the two is monitored at the receiver, and we can get a visual output of it here at the oscilloscope, which virtually just tells us what the signal looks like.
So put simply, it's a ghost detector?
Yeah, or we hope it is.
The trio advertised themselves as ready and willing to remove troublesome ghosts from haunted premises. And to their surprise, a woman offered them $500 to rid her restaurant of a poltergeist. They refused the money, but took up the offer and spent a nervous night in the Black Rose restaurant, which is housed in a Victorian terrace in the Melbourne suburb of St Kilda.
What did you find?
We're not too sure. Overall, well, we think there's possibly something there.
What makes you think that?
Just the readings we picked up with their equipment.
When we returned to the Black Rose restaurant, it was closed down. The woman who asked Stephen and his friends to get rid of the poltergeist had fled the business, leaving no forwarding address. The previous owners said they had no problems with ghosts when running the Black Rose. But when we tracked down the owners before them, it was a different story. Ernst Patzold operated the restaurant in 1978.
My concern was one night we were sitting in the Black Horse restaurant, an alcove area. We were sitting there and we heard sort of somebody walk down the stairs because it was old wooden stairs. And I got up and I looked and there was nothing there. And so that was pretty spooky in a way.
Did you see anything else happen there?
Yes, one day I was sitting as well in the same area, and I heard something falling outside, and I got up and I looked in the restaurant, and there was actually a sugar bowl, which the waitress claimed she must have put in the center, but I don't know if I have to believe her, but it was all sprayed all over the floor.
What was the most dramatic thing that happened?
Well, the dramatic thing actually happened to my partner, Brian, when he was doing the book upstairs in the office, he was sitting and there was a glass standing just on its own, and all of a sudden it just shattered into virtually a million of pieces. It was incredible, all fine little small particles.
Would you be willing to go back to the restaurant, all of you, and see if there is anything there with your equipment?
Yeah, we'd love to. Yeah.
Not scared to do that?
No. Messy.
Yeah. Could have set the equipment up in the back room. No. Why not?
Back where we had it last time.
For 12 weary hours, the boys monitored the deserted restaurant. And at one stage, they did manage to record an unexplained energy form on their ghost detector. When we returned, just before dawn, they could hardly keep their eyes open.
Several times we've detected something in the energy in the field.
Something seems to pass through.
Through the field, yeah. We couldn't tell you what it was, but it was a definite something in the field.
You don't have any explanation for that?
No.
Anything apart from that?
Yes. While we were downstairs, on several occasions we heard footsteps above, and we've been talking to some other people, and it seems that it's a frequent occurrence. So that's something which could be investigated.
Stephen, do you feel as if you've proved that there's anything in this building?
Certainly had a go at it. We've tried.
I'd like some more proof.
Stephen, do you believe there's something here?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Why do you believe that?
I don't know, I've got a hunch about it, I suppose.
And Damien, the official skeptic, do you believe there's anything here?
No, nothing. Only it just proves how hard these sort of things are to prove.
No one has ever provided unchallengeable proof that ghosts do exist. Recordings and photographs of apparitions are too easily faked, and no scientist has yet managed to convince a ghost to enter his laboratory for examination. The strongest evidence is the testimony of thousands of people around the world who have experienced something beyond the understanding of conventional science. It has not been possible to include interviews with all the witnesses involved in the 14 hauntings in this program. But in each case, at least 3 people claim to have observed supernatural phenomena at the site involved. The girls in Brisbane are supported by 3 other witnesses. There are 4 recent witnesses to the haunting of the parsonage at Port Arthur, and scores of other recorded sightings during the past 112 years. At least 7 police testified to the haunting at Rose Bay Police Station, and hundreds of people heard the mysterious poltergeist knocking at East Oakley in Melbourne. The horrifying events at York Hospital were witnessed by 5 adults and 28 children, and the haunting at the Rocks Visitor Centre was also witnessed by a number of police while it was used as a coroner's court. 4 local businessmen testified to having recently seen Fisher's ghost, but they feared ridicule and declined to be interviewed. More than 40 sightings of the ghost of Federici at the Princess Theatre have been recorded since the turn of the century, and a similar number of people claim to have had ghostly experiences at Clarkfield Hotel over the same period. 12 rather amazed people claim to have seen Adelaide's curvaceous bikini ghost, and there are dozens more who claim to have seen the shipwrecked ghost of Henry or suffered the curse of the alchemists. Over the years, 7 staff members and a number of visitors have reported supernatural phenomena at Fremantle Museum. The grey ghost of Stoller House has been seen or heard by a scientist, a chemist, a hospital matron, and an unknown number of local people. There are 4 known witnesses to strange events at the Black Rose restaurant, not counting the 3 students with their ghost detector. Witnesses in this program have signed a document which states that they have given a truthful and accurate account of their experience.
We've come to the end of our exploration of the supernatural, and I wonder what you've made of the material we've presented. If you've had a similar experience, then you can see that you're in good company, because a judge more than a century ago, and modern scientists, housewives, builders, sailors, and policemen have had similar experiences. Hauntings pose fundamental questions about the nature of man. They suggest that a part of human personality is free of space and time and may even survive death. Of course, we've got a lot more to learn about the supernatural. But as a psychologist, I'd like to say this. The ghosts you've seen on this program were as real to their witnesses as the chair that you're sitting in or the television set that you're watching. Perhaps more real than my image that is talking to you at the moment. You see, there are many levels of reality, and we live in a much more fascinating and complex world than some people would have you believe.